So I know for me, the world of breast pumps was a little confusing. And as a first time breastfeeder on my third child, I had many questions. It was often difficult to find the right one for me. So, understandably, we've had a few questions around choosing a breast pump from our audience. The first question was actually a really common one. Do you actually have to buy a breast pump?
So not necessarily. If you're only planning on directly breastfeeding, you might not ever need a breast pump, especially if everything goes really well with breastfeeding, for example. If, on the other hand, you are planning on exclusively pumping for your baby, then a breast pump is an essential item. It's also being aware that some women have babies before 37 weeks of pregnancy who are born maybe a little bit more premature, or babies who will need a neonatal unit admission stay after birth as well. These are the women who are much more likely to require a pump. It's also being aware that if you're planning on combination feeding, then yes, you will probably going to want to consider a pump so that you can keep your milk supply up, and so that way you can give your breast milk in a bottle, for example. And it might also be worth considering, are you returning to work? Because again, that might guide whether or not you need a breast pump or not. You can always buy a breast pump next day delivery, though, if you suddenly needed one postnatally, if you're in that sort of, I'm planning on only breastfeeding, and then see what happens in that postnatal period.
Yeah, fab. So, what are the benefits?
So there are lots of benefits to being able to express. It enables you to be able to give your own breast milk to your baby. It's just through a bottle instead. So it still has all the health, the immunity goodness, has all the health benefits for both the mum and for the baby from the breast milk supply and the breast milk feeding perspective. But it also enables parents to have the flexibility as well. So for mums who are going back to work, it enables them to continue breastfeeding their baby through expressing in bottles. It also enables them to maybe have a bit of a break as well, or involve the partners and the wider family in feeding their baby should they choose to.
Yeah, my girls were desperate to feed mine. So, can a woman get by just hand expressing?
So, if you're only breastfeeding on a really irregular and infrequent basis, then yes, that is absolutely possible, particularly if you're not leaving your baby for long periods of time. But if you are planning on going back to work, or you're going to leave them for sort of more than 3 or 4 hours at a time, then this is where you're going to want to consider a pump, not only to help prevent engorgement and mastitis in you, but also to keep up your milk supply for your baby as well.
Great. So, when it comes to buying a breast pump, do you have any advice on how a woman can find the right one for her?
Yes, so there are several things that you want to consider. So, firstly, what is the reason that you are planning on expressing for your baby? Because everyone's different from that perspective. Then, how often are you planning on expressing? Because that might also guide the type of pump that you may or may not want. You'll then need to consider what your budget is and what you're going to be able to afford. And then finally, what your own preferences are as well. And all of these questions, if you ask yourself those, that will help guide what is right for you. So let me give you just a couple of examples as to how that might work. So, for example, one mum might be wanting to return at 3 months postnatal, and she might be working much longer hours. Keeping supply is really important at this stage, pre 6 months. And financially, they have the money that they can invest in a double pump, such as like the wearable double man move, for example. And this is where it'd be really beneficial for them. Another mum, on the other hand, might not be planning on returning to work until her baby's over a year. She's got no weekends away planned. She's only ever away for maybe an hour or two at a time. This is where something like a more affordable option, such as a manual pump, such as the Man manual, might be a more suited option, for example.
Great. So, once you know what your needs are, how do you choose the best pump that's the best type of pump for you? And how can you decide if manual or electric is right for you?
Yes. So, for example, this is a manual. A manual is usually the most affordable one on the market, for example. The benefits include not needing an energy source, for example. It's really cheap. You're in control of it. So you're in control of the actual handle itself and the suction, therefore. The only problem with this is that you probably wouldn't want to use this if you were going to be using it several times a day to try and really get that milk supply in. It's being aware that your hands will tire after sort of 10 to 15 minutes on each side. So whilst it's an affordable option, it's usually for infrequent use for parents. On the other hand, you've got things like an electric pump, and they can either be wired or they can be wireless. Electric pumps are slightly more expensive to buy than a manual, but it gives women the opportunity to be able to pump at a much more frequent perspective. So it's much easier just to put the pump on and let the pump do it for you. All pumps have got 2 modes. So all electric pumps have got a stimulation mode and an expression mode. That's to try and mimic what babies will naturally do at the breast. So babies, when they feed at the breast, they will stimulate, flutter, suck, and then what will happen is you'll get a big letdown. And what the electric pumps are trying to do is they stimulate to try and let that letdown out, and then the expression mode will draw out and be able to obtain more milk, for example. And this is where you have the difference between a wired, where you're going to need to sit down and be attached either to a battery-operated pack or a wall for mains electricity, for example. Some electric wired ones do come as a rechargeable option to be aware of, such as the MAM electric pump, for example. And then you've got other pumps such as the MAM Move, for example, which is wireless. So it can go in your bra. The other benefits to that is it's really discreet. So you could be doing it while you're doing your food shop, for example, or whilst you are at work, sat at the desk, for example. It's sat in your bra. All of the electric breast pumps have got those 2 modes, and that can really help, particularly for women who are exclusively expressing. An electric pump is one of the most beneficial ways of pumping milk. It's also worth noting that whatever pump you get, whether it's manual or electric, look at the size of the flange. And flanges are something that people look at me and go, what is that entirely? So a flange is the part of the breast pump, whether it's manual or whether it's electric, that goes over the nipple. Now, if it's too big, what will happen is the nipple will be overly drawn out. There's too much of a gap, and it's hard to show on video camera, but it's too much of a gap and it will overly draw out the nipple. What will happen is the woman will feel more uncomfortable and it won't be a comfortable feed. So milk supply will be reduced as a result. If, on the other hand, you've got a really small one, for example, really tiny, what will happen is it will pinch. And that pinching, again, won't help with the milk supply output either, because the woman won't be feeling comfortable. So it won't help with that milk volume output. So you want just right when it comes to nipple flanges. So this is a 17 millimeters from the MAM Move pump, which comes with 4 different inserts to be able to help find that comfortable flange. And there's not enough of a gap that it's going to overly draw out, but it's not pinching either. So for this personal breast on here, for this nipple, this is the one that works best. So whenever you are choosing a breast pump, look at the breast pumps. Do they come with different size flanges? Most pumps will give you an alternative, so it's worth having a look at. But that will enable much more milk out by looking at the flange. And these are really nice soft silicone too.
Great. Thank you, Angie, for answering all of our questions today and for joining me. It's been really, really helpful. And if you have any questions on expressing or breastfeeding, drop a question below.